Hi, and welcome back to Chapter 2 of the Web Developer course. So we've looked at HTML in some detail now, and you should feel that you pretty much understand how HTML works and that you know the basics of how to put a website together. So now we're going to look at CSS. What is CSS? It's short for Cascading Style Sheets. And essentially it's a set of instructions to tell a browser how to make a particular website look. So it's all about styles. So in terms of the difference between CSS and HTML, you should be thinking that HTML is about the content of your website and CSS is about the style, the look. So let's dig into this a little bit deeper and see how it works. I'm going to go back to example.com. which we know fairly well now. And I'm going to look at the source once again of this page. Now you'll notice there's a section here that we just got rid of before and we didn't pay any attention to. But now this is what we're really interested in. You'll notice it has a style tag at the top and it has a type of text or CSS, Cascading Style Sheets. So just having a very quick overview of this, we've got different parts of the web page that we're referring to, the body, the div, some links, and some other bit of information there. And each of those has a particular set of styles associated to it. Background color, margins, paddings, fonts, etc., etc. We're not going to go into the details of that now, but that's just an overview of really how CSS looks and how it works. To give you a broader idea, if you've got a bit more time, I'll link to this page in the doc for this course. But again, W3 Schools has a great introduction on CSS, and particularly what we're going to use here is the CSS demo that they've got. I'm just going to talk you through that. So this page should look fairly familiar to you. It's similar to the sort of pages we were working on in the HTML part of the course. It's got a heading, some paragraphs, tables, ordered lists and unordered lists there. So what we can do quite nicely, if we look at one of the style sheets here, we've got a body tag and some styles there. We've got header tags and table tags, etc. And each of those have styles applied to them. So what we can do is see what the website looks like with exactly the same HTML but different styles. So now you can see that was without the styles. This is with the styles. So we've got a background color now, we've got a different font, we've got a nice blue background here, and everything looks a little bit different, I think a little bit nicer. Similarly, we can use a different set of styles, so we've got a very different look now to this page, and a third set there. With greater padding, we've actually got a gradient background there, which is quite nice. And you can see the styles that make up those backgrounds and those different looks. So that's style 2. That's style 3. So that's a brief overview of what CSS is. We'll just go back and have a look at that. Now we're going to go on to see how we can actually use CSS to customize our websites. Right, so let's dig into CSS a little bit deeper and see what we can do with it. I'm back on my desktop here and I'm going to go back into the folder that we created in the last section of the course, my websites, and I'm going to create a new folder. And I'm going to call this number 2, CSS. So I suggest you do the same. We'll put all the files that we use in the CSS section of the course into this folder. Okay, so now I'm going to switch over to my text editor, Text Wrangler, and I'm going to create a new text document. Once again, I'm going to call it index.html, so I'll save it at the start here. So, desktop there, my websites, CSS, index.html. Fantastic. Just bring that in there. Right, you can see the file has appeared in the Explorer or Finder window there. So we want to get a starting point for our website. I'm going to do the same as what we did before and switch over to Chrome and get the source code for example.com, and we'll use that as our basis for our index.html file here. So there it is, example.com. I'm going to go to View, Developer, View Source, and I'm going to use Command A or Control A on Windows to select the whole of the text, and I'm going to use Command V to paste it in, and I'll press save to save that. Great, let's just get this up in our browser. So we'll switch over to the Finder and open index.html in Chrome. There it is. Great. Now I'm going to build this rather more from scratch, so I want to get rid of all of these styles. We'll change the title to Learning CSS, and we'll keep the body content there. Great. So that's what it looks like. Fantastic. So what can we actually do with CSS? The first way I'm going to show you how to do it is not actually the recommended way at all. It's the quickest way to get up and started, and it's worth knowing about, but it's not, for reasons I'll explain in a minute, the way that normal developers would use CSS. So it's known as inline CSS, and the way we use inline CSS is in that P tag there, we give it a style option. So next to the P, I just write style equals, and then I use quote marks to contain my styles, and within that you can do anything you like. So let's start with changing the color. We'll make it blue. So all of this has to be lowercase, and we have to use the American spelling of color. That's the standard. If you use the British or any other spelling, it won't work. So nice and simple. So style is equal to color blue. Save that, refresh. There we go. We've got a nice bit of blue text there. We can add more than one command if we want. So I'll put a semicolon in to separate out our different instructions, and we'll have font dash size colon 200%. So that should make it twice as big as it was before. There we go. Excellent. So I'm not going to go into all of the different CSS instructions that you can use here, but this is just a way of showing you how we actually build CSS into our documents. Now we'll see in the next video why this isn't a good idea and a better way of incorporating style into your document, which is known as internal CSS. So what's wrong with doing it that way then? Here we've got our styles inside our p tags, and it all works fine, it all looks fine. Well, there's a couple of reasons why we don't do it this way. One of them is purely to keep our code nice and organized. So if we've got style tags everywhere, all over the place, to make the website display in a certain way, then our code is going to be horrendous. It's going to have content like this sort of area with the actual words of the page on it, and it's going to have styles inside that. If you want to get a particularly complicated site or a site that displays in a certain way, you might have endless style tags all over the place. So that's one reason not to do it this way. Another one is that if you've got several different paragraph tags and you decide you want to change them all from blue to green, for example, then doing it this way, you need to manually go through to each of those style tags and change the blue to a green, which is obviously not something that you want to be doing on a regular basis. So going back to our good old example domain, we can see a better way of doing this, and this is known as internal CSS. So once again, we'll look at the source of this page, and now we're going to pay a bit more attention to this bit here. So let's copy and paste that into our page, and so let's have a look at this. So what have we got? The body refers to this body tag here. That is the whole of the actual content of the page, really. So anything in this body section is going to affect anything inside the body section of the HTML. So pretty much everything on the page. Div tag there is going to be anything inside a div. So in this case, it's all inside that div. So that's going to affect everything inside that particular div. You can see the nice thing about this is that if I want to have certain set of instructions for my div, and at the moment they're all 600 pixels wide, if I want to change that to 800 pixels wide, then that's going to affect every div in this section here. So if I had more than one div, it would affect them all. So that's the really great thing about doing it in an internal way rather than an inline way. Not only does it keep everything kind of separated out, but it also means that if you update one thing, it will update every type of that thing that appears on the page. So let's get rid of this, what they've got there, and create some stuff from scratch. So we'll get rid of those divs and we'll just work straight in the body. So let's start with creating a paragraph tag. Whoops. And we'll simply have, this is some text. Full stop. Okay, let's save that and just switch back over here. There it is. Great. So how do we affect that style tag? There's a number of ways that we could do it. We could refer to a body. We could refer to a paragraph. I think we're going to go for paragraph for now. So we'll do a P to say that we want this style to affect any paragraph tags. And we do an open curly brackets like that. We're going to end with a close curly brackets. I always think it's a good idea to open and close before you've written your content. Otherwise, it's easy to forget to actually close the thing. And we'll do the same as before. We'll look at color. Let's make it red this time. So let's just see if that works. Fantastic. And obviously I can then change my paragraph. Let's put in another one. So we've got two paragraphs. This is some text. This is some more text. Hey, great. So we now have both of those as paragraphs. And if I now change this to green and save that, it updates both of those paragraphs, which is exactly what we want. So this is internal CSS. We've got our style tags at the top, as they had on the example.com, and we've got our paragraphs, which are both being affected by that. Now, what happens if we want to make a certain paragraph a certain style and a different paragraph a different style? Well, we've got two ways of doing that, and that's using classes and IDs. So we'll start with looking at classes. What's a class? In terms of CSS, a class is a name for a certain type of text which is going to obey certain instructions or have certain styles. So let's add a class here. We do it like this. So we have a class descriptor there, and we're going to name our class large. You can call your classes whatever you like. Now, instead of our paragraph, we're now going to have a dot. You always have a full stop, which displays, or which refers to a class. So dot large. So now anything I put in these curly brackets is going to refer to this large class and is going to affect the style of that p tag. So let's say font size. Let's make it really big, 300%. Save, refresh. Great. So this large p tag is now displaying at 300%. You'll notice that we've lost the green because I've taken away the p style that we had before. If I want to change this p to something else, I can give it the same class if I want to, if I want that one to be large as well. So you can have different p's with the same class. Great. Or you can change them to something else. So you get the idea of hopefully what a class is. Now an ID is a very similar thing. The only difference between classes and IDs is that the tendency is to only use IDs for a single element within a page. So classes you can use many times, as I did there with that paragraph and the other paragraph. The convention is to only use IDs for things that will only appear on the page once. So if I use this ID of large over here, then I shouldn't use it again. I should only use IDs once. And that particularly comes in when we're using JavaScript later on. You often use a tag, an instruction called getElementById. And so if an element has a specific ID, then we know for sure that that's going to only refer to one element on a page. Whereas if an element only has a class, that could refer to several elements on a page. So classes and IDs we use in the same way with styles, but classes you can have many of the same class on the same page, whereas with IDs you only have one. So let's change this ID to green. So I'm going to have a green P, and I'm going to be sure that there's only one of those on the page. Now instead of a dot, we use a hash symbol to refer to an ID in our style CSS language, and then we do the same thing as before, and hopefully you've got the idea by now. That color green will make that green. Notice I've put a semicolon on the end of that line. That's something that you'll see a lot in most programming languages. You'll see a semicolon at the end of each line, and it just separates out the end of each instruction. So let's save that. See how it looks? Great. So we've got our large, we've got our green P's. You can apply a class and an ID to the same element. Let's have a look at that. There we go. So now we've got large green text. So an ID of green and a class of large. Let's just add one more and see what else we can do with this. So we'll have a third paragraph tag, and I'm going to say the third word in this paragraph is underlined. So how am I going to do that? So far we've only got a way of applying classes and IDs to the whole paragraph. Well, there's a handy new HTML tag called span. So the third word in this paragraph is word. And what I'm going to do is surround that by a span tag, like that. And then I'm going to give that span a certain class. So we'll call it underline. And then up here, I'm going to create a new instruction for my underline class, and this is going to be text-decoration : underline. We will go through all of the different CSS instructions, so color, font size, text decoration, and there's also a summary document in the docs for this course, so don't worry too much about that at this stage, but hopefully you can guess that this is going to give the text a certain decoration, and that decoration is going to be underlined. So let's have a look, save that, refresh. Great, so now we've got a specific span tag which only affects the particular words within that span. One final thing, we can give a particular tag more than one class at the same time. So maybe I want this to be underlined and green. Oh no, I don't want to use green because green is an ID. I'll make it underline and large instead. So let's save that and have a look. Fantastic. We can even go the whole hog and give it 3 different classes. So let's have, what shall we use as our third instruction? We'll say bolded as well. So we'll have a class of bold. And we'll say font weight bold. There There we go, and now we can just add that in. So you just separate your classes with a simple space, save, and that's now bolded as well. So we've looked there at classes and IDs. Classes are something which you can use several times to refer to a paragraph tag or a span or anything else that you want to have similar styles. So in this case we've got our large class, our underlined class, and our bold class. And the handy thing about that is that every time we update the large class, that's going to affect everything that has that particular class. So that's this top paragraph, the green paragraph, and also the word there. IDs work in a very similar way. The only restriction is with an ID you can only have one of them in your page, so you shouldn't have more than one ID at any one time. And finally, we looked at the fact that you can have classes and IDs for the same tag. So this P has an ID and a class as well. And you can also have multiple classes for individual tags, which you can do just by separating them with a space. Now, if you were paying attention a couple of videos ago, you will have seen that we started talking about a div tag. We saw it in the sample example domain source. Let's just have a quick look again. View source. There it is. There's some div styles, and the whole chunk of text here was enclosed in a div tag. So what is a div tag? Really, it's just a division of your web page. So most web pages are divided into certain areas. It may be the header area, and then the main text area, and possibly a footer area at the bottom. And each of those could be defined by a separate div. Even within those, you might often want to have different divs that divide up each section into smaller sections. So a div is just a way to separate out your content into logical sections and to make it easier to keep your content organized and to display the web page that you want. So let's have a look and see how these work. We'll switch back to our page. So I'll create a new div at the top, and we'll just have our first paragraph tag inside that div. I'm going to try and keep my indenting all quite nice so it looks pretty. So we've got a div there, and we end the div after that first paragraph tag. So let's just save that. Okay, that's fine. It hasn't actually made any difference at all. But we can do then things with that div. So the first thing I'm going to do is give the div a background color. So background dash American spelling color, and we'll make this blue. And that will show us where the div actually is. There it is. So there is our div. That's what it looks like. It's actually just a box. So divs are always rectangles, and they just surround the content that is inside them. Now, but we could use this div to actually control the content a little bit. So let's say I only wanted the div to be 100 pixels wide. Then I would say width 100 px. Px for pixels. Let's see how that looks. There we go. So we've now changed it into a box, and the div is actually controlling the layout of the text. I can change the height as well if I want to. So at the moment the height is being automatically generated by the size that is needed to fit that text in, but maybe I want it to be a little bit bigger than that, and I have a height of 300 pixels. Fine. Okay, so you're getting the idea. So a div is a section of a website. It's a rectangle essentially that you can control in a certain way. Now if I create another div, it will, of course, have to follow the stylings of that first div. So they're all going to be the same size, and they're all going to have a blue background color. I probably don't want this, so what I'll do is I'll give my div a class. So let's call this blue box, like that. And so instead of div, I'm going to use the dot to refer to the class, and blue box. Great, so now only the div with a blue box class is going to be blue and have that background. Now I don't particularly like it, I think it's too thin, so I'm going to make it 200 pixels wide and also 200 pixels high. So we've got a nice sort of boxy square there. Let's give our second div a class. Let's call it red box. You can possibly guess what I'm going to do with that. I'm going to give it a background color of red, and we'll make this one a bit wider, so width 300 pixels and height 100 pixels. There we go. So we've got our blue box div, which is 200 pixels by 200 pixels with a background color of blue, and our red box div, which has a background color of red and is 300 pixels wide and 100 pixels high. So a quick recap, divs are used to separate out areas of content in your website. They can also be given styles to control both the div itself and the content within that div. Great, so we're doing pretty well. We've delved into styles in some detail now. We've looked at font sizes, colors, a bit of underlining, a bit of bolding, and we've got some divs with certain background colors, widths and heights. That's a pretty good start. Some of you may be thinking though, so far we've got blue and we've got red and we've got green and yellow and those sort of colours, but what if we want to use a more specific colour and we not be limited to just the standard colours? Well, there is of course a way to do this, and that's using HTML colour codes. So I've got the website html-color-codes.info up here. It's a great little website, and let's see how this works. So they've got a great color chart. You can check it out yourself. It's got a whole range of different colors there, so you can pick pretty much any shade that you like. Now, if let's say we want some kind of sort of purple here, I quite like the look of that one. So if we click on that one, you'll notice that it's appeared down here. Now, what is that purple then? It's a certain purple shade which has the HTML code B404AE. Now, I'm not going to go into the details of how those codes are actually constructed and what they mean. The important thing is you can use them in your HTML file to refer to that particular color. So I'm just going to go in there and copy that number, and I'm going to change my blue box background to that one. You have to include the hash. The hash is important because it tells the browser that we're talking about a color code rather than a particular color such as blue or green. Now I know that color is purple, so I'm going to change my class name to purple box, and I'll change it down here as well. Okay, let's see how that looks. Great, so we've now got that particular shade of purple as our background. So you can of course choose any color you like. I suggest you have a little play around and change the colors as you like. If you want a really precise set of color codes that are even more detailed than that, you can use something like this. So on the same page, HTML color codes, I'll just stretch that out a little so we can see the whole thing, and you can now use absolutely any shade of any color that you want. So let's say we want some kind of green. We can click there and it will give us the color code of any of those shades. So I'll go for a kind of dark green there. So that's that number. Again, I'm going to copy that. And I'm going to change my red box to a green box with a background color of that number. Very important that you put the hash symbol in front, otherwise that's not going to work. And where's green box gone? Oh, there it is. So replace the red box class with green box there, and let's just make sure that's worked. Great. So that's how you put a more precise level of color into your HTML documents. You don't need to be restricted to just blue, green, yellow. You can choose absolutely any color you like. And if you don't know what the code for a particular color is, you can find it at a website similar to htmlcolorcodes.info. Now, one issue you may have noticed so far is that everything, all of our divs and paragraphs are appearing vertically beneath each other. Now, quite often we might not want that. We might want to have a box here and then a second box to the right of that. And we might want to call both of those divs. Now, there's a really nice, easy way to do that, and that's what I'm going to show you now. So with divs, so we've got our two divs, purple box and green box. What we're going to do is something called floating. So you can float divs and indeed paragraphs and other elements if you want to the left or to the right. Let's see what effect that has. So we use the float instruction and we're going to float purple box to the left. See what that does. Okay, so now this has messed everything up a little bit, but you get the idea. So now this purple box is on the left of all the other content. So all the other content is to the right, and that single purple box is floated to the left. Okay, so what happens if we float something to the right? Let's take green box and float it right. Okay. So we've got the purple box floated to the left and the green box floated to the right. If I sort of stretch that out, you can maybe see clearer what's going on. So it's a bit like a newspaper column. Think of it like that. So anything floated to the left is going to be aligned left. Anything floated to the right is going to be aligned right. Anything which is not floated at all is just going to flow in between those two. So this paragraph tag at the very bottom there, this paragraph tag here, isn't floated at all. So that's just going to go in the middle of those two tags there. Now let's just see what happens if we float the paragraph tag to the left. So we've only got one, oh no, we've got several paragraph tags, so let's give it a class. We'll give it a class of float left, and then we'll float that to the left as well. So float left. Okay, so that's now being floated too. So it just aligns to the left with the purple box there. And you can see that if I bring that in, it then sits underneath it quite nicely. Okay, so that's floating. Everything you float to the left will follow one thing after another, gradually going from left to right. Anything you float to the right is going to align itself to the right, and then if you float several things, then they're going to gradually go back to the left. Now, one final thing to say about floating is quite often you want your non-floated text to appear beneath all of the floated text. So maybe you want something to the left, something to the right, and we want this paragraph to go beneath the whole lot. How do we do that? Well, we use a special type of div called a clearing div. So we'll create a div, we'll give it a class of clear, and this is just going to be an empty div that just sits there with its only purpose is to break those floats, as it's known, and stop floating completely and start the flow again. So how do we do that in CSS? Well, we refer to our class with a dot clear, and we use the instruction clear both. Let's see what that does. Great. So we've now got our div which is aligned to the left or floated to the left, and another div which is floated to the right, and our paragraph is then underneath both of those divs. Now you can use clear left and clear right as well as instructions, but generally the most common thing to do is to clear both, because you want to clear both the left and the right floats. Right, we're now going to look at positioning. Now this can be a little bit tricky and can get a little bit complicated, but it's extremely powerful and enables you to create some really quite complicated layouts with your CSS. So let's see how this looks. First of all, I'm going to get rid of my floating. We're going to make things a little bit simpler so we can see clearer what's going on with our divs. So let's get rid of this float there, and we don't need the clear anymore either. So we'll get rid of that just to tidy everything up a little bit. So save that, refresh. Oops. Let's get rid of that float as well. Okay, so everything is now as it was before the previous video. We've got our two divs, our purple div and our green div, and our paragraph at the bottom there. So what if you wanted to align this div slightly differently? So at the moment it's just sitting there. It might be that I want to move it slightly to the right and slightly down. How would I do that? Well, what we would do, we go to our purple box class details there, and we change the position nature of this div to relative. So that means that I can move this position around move this div around relative to where it would otherwise be, i.e. here. So let's say I want to move it 100 pixels to the right. Now, slightly confusingly, we give it, if we want to move it to the right, we give it an instruction of left. That is because what we're really doing here is setting a left margin of 100 pixels. So we're adding a margin to the left of this purple div here, which makes it effectively move to the right. Let's see what that does. Okay, we've now moved our purple div a little bit to the right. Fantastic, simple enough. Similarly, we can move it downwards if we want by giving it a top margin, let's say of 200 pixels. We've now shifted it down. Notice it's actually gone on top of this other element, or the two other elements there, the green div and the P tag. So that will happen when you move things around in this way. Then it will move on top of other elements like the green div tag there. I'll show you a way of moving it around without doing this in the next video. But with positioning, when you move things position-wise, they're on top of each other. Now that begs the question, how does the browser decide which one goes on top? Well, at the moment, the purple div goes on top simply because it comes first in the flow. So this purple box div comes before the green box div. But what if you wanted the green one to be on top? Well, what you do is you give them both what's known as a Z index value. Now, the Z index value essentially is a layering tool. It allows you to put one div on top of another, or indeed any element on top of another. And essentially, when you've got two elements which both have a Z index value, the one with the larger Z index value is going to go on top. So let's give this one a Z index of 1, and we'll give the green box a Z index of 2. And let's see what happens. Nothing. Interesting. Now, the reason that this has not actually done anything is because we haven't given the green box div a position. And Z indexing, for it to work, each element that's involved has to have a position. So all we do is give the green box div a relative position. Notice that's not going to move it at all unless I specify some left or top instructions. And now, there we go. The green box is on top of the purple box. So remember, when you're giving Z index values to certain divs, they must have a position type specified. If they're not given a position type, then the Z indexing won't make any difference. Okay, so that's how you decide what item goes on top of any other item when you've got some overlap. What if you wanted to move the purple box to the left? So let's just get rid of left and top. for a minute and remind ourselves that's what it looked like back originally. So what if I wanted to move this up a little bit, for example? Well, what you do is you specify a negative margin on the top. So maybe I want a negative margin of 50 pixels. That's likely to take it above the top of the page, but that's fine. So we'll save that. There we go. So that shifts it up. Similarly, if we want to shift it left, then we give it a negative left margin. We can give it a negative margin of 100 pixels, and that'll move it to the left. So it's now gone almost completely off the page. Okay, so that's how we move things around relative to where they were originally. But there are a couple of other ways that you can move stuff around. So there are a couple of other position attributes that are worth looking at this stage. So the first one I'll show you is the position absolute. Yeah, and we'll do it with the green type there. So position relative moves things around relative to where they would otherwise be. Position absolute is slightly different. Let's have a look and see what that does. So let's get rid of our position relatives and create a position absolute and see exactly what that does. Okay, now what on earth has happened there? What's happened is that this purple box is still positioned where it was before, towards the top left of the page, but it's now been taken out of the flow of the page. So essentially this green div here and the paragraph underneath are ignoring the presence of this purple div. So it's there, but it's not affecting the layout of any other elements on the page. And that's how something with a absolute position actually works. Now the subtleties of that are a little bit complicated. I'm not going to go into them in great detail here. We'll look at them later on. But essentially, if you want to use a absolute position, then the effect that you will get is that everything else on the page will ignore that position attribute. Now there are a couple more that are worth just looking at very briefly. And one of them is fixed. So if we save that, now if we refresh that, it looks exactly the same. So fixed positioning is very similar to absolute positioning in the sense that everything else on the page will ignore the presence of that fixed div. But let's add in a few more green boxes. And give the green boxes a greater height. So let's call it 500 pixels. And I've done that just so that we've got lots of content on the page so I can scroll down. Now when we start to scroll, you see what happens there. So a fixed div is actually fixed relative to the browser window. So quite common in web design at the moment is to have a fixed header bar at the top. You've probably seen this on several websites, so that when you scroll down, the header bar is still there, giving you access to the menu and various other options. And so that's a very common use of fixed positioning. But that's how it works. So with fixed positioning, just with absolute positioning, you can still use the left and top instructions. So let's move it to the right and down a little bit. Yep. But the important thing is when you scroll up and down, the thing that you've given the fixed positioning to is not going to scroll. It will be fixed relative to the browser window. Now, just to finish off, you might be wondering what type of positioning boxes and divs and paragraph tags are given if you don't actually specify a position at all. Well, the answer is simply a static position. So if I set the position to static, then we scroll back up, then we get back to where we started. So if you don't give a position instruction to any div on your page, then they'll just be static by default. And if you want to set them to the default, then you can just use position static to do that. Now, as I said, this is a reasonably complex topic. If you want to look into it a bit more, particularly the absolute positioning, then have a look at w3schools.com CSS positioning. I will link to that in the docs, but it's a really nice little article and has lots of opportunities for you to try this out for yourself as well. Now, I mentioned in the previous video that there was a way to move divs and paragraphs around which didn't make them overlap onto other elements, other divs and other paragraphs. So I'm going to show you how to do that now. I'm just going to get rid of these extra green boxes because we don't need those anymore, and I'm going to change that to a more reasonable height of 200 pixels. Okay, so we're back to something similar to what we had at the beginning of the last video. So what happens if I want to move the purple div, say a little to the right and a little down, and I want everything beneath that to flow accordingly, so to move down with it? Well, how you do that is you add a margin to that item. So let me show you how this works. I've just got rid of the position static because we don't need it. As we saw at the end of the last video, position static is the default, so we don't need to have that there. So if I state I want to have a margin of, let's say, 10 pixels, what does that do? Okay, so it moves it slightly to the right. Let's get a slightly bigger margin, make it clearer. What we've done there is we've created a whole margin around the div. So that means that anything below the div is going to get shifted down by that margin, and the div itself is going to get shifted to the right because of this margin here. The div itself is shifted down because there's a margin there, and if we did have anything to the right of this div, then that would be shifted to the right as well. So we've created a whole margin around the edge of that div. Alright, okay, simple enough. Now, what if we wanted to move it a different amount right and down? Let's see how we do that. We can actually specify the margin of the div to be different on the top, bottom, left and right. And the way we do this is we put several different instructions in, or measurements in. So let's say 50 pixels, let's say 100 pixels, let's say 30 pixels, and let's say 10 pixels. Now, the important thing to remember is that these are being assigned to the margins of the div in a specific order. So this 50 pixels margin is now going to be the top margin. So the top margin for this div is going to be 50 pixels. And the others go round in a clockwise order. So 50 pixels at the top. The right margin will now be 100 pixels. The bottom margin will be 30, and the left margin will be 10 pixels. Let's see how that looks. Oops, I don't think I saved it. Let's try it again. Okay, there we go. So that shifted things around a little bit. Notice this big margin doesn't actually make any difference because there's nothing to the right of this div. We're not floating anything. So it's an invisible margin as far as we can see. But this margin at the bottom is now 30 pixels. If we want to make that really clear, we could change it to 230 pixels. Save that and refresh, and you can see that that's moved that down. So we've now got a really large margin at the bottom, and the 10 pixel margin at the left is quite small. Again, we can increase that if we want and move it. That effectively moves it to the right by giving it a large margin on the left. So that's how you make a margin which is different for the top, right, bottom and left of the div. There's one other thing that's worth knowing, is a different way of doing it. You can actually assign the different margins differently. So it might be that you want to add a margin to an item, a div or a paragraph, but you don't actually know, in some cases, what the existing margins are, or you don't want to set them again. So you only want to set, say, the left margin. Now the way you do that is you use the instruction margin-left, and then you can set that margin to, let's say, 400 pixels. And that now resets everything else, so we don't have any margins, or we haven't set any margins at least, on the bottom and the right and the top, but we've set the left margin to 400 pixels. And similarly, you can do that with margin top, margin right, and margin bottom. So you can set each of the margins separately if you want to only set one of them and leave the rest alone. Great, we're making really excellent progress here. We've looked at positioning, we've looked at margins, we've looked at divs, we've looked at styling text, we've done a lot of things with CSS. Now, you're about 2/3 of the way through the instructional part of the CSS chapter of this course, so congratulations for getting this far. I hope you're following along and it's all making sense. If you do have any questions to ask, please post them in the forum. The link's at the end of every video, or you can get there directly from the course website as well. So, we're moving on now to look at something called padding. This is very similar to margins, which is why we're looking at it here. So let me just get rid of the margin that we set at the end of the last video and move everything back to how it was before. So quite a common thing to want to do is to not have the actual contents of your divs right up against the edge. So it might be that you want a nice bit of space to actually give a nice gap to what's in the content of the div. So let's see how that might work. We don't need our Z index anymore either because we haven't got anything overlapping. Let's keep things nice and tidy. So very similar to margins, all we do, we use the padding instruction and we say let's give it a padding of 10 pixels. There we go. So we've now got padding all the way around this text here. Now notice that we've got more padding at the top than we have in the on the left. So it looks like this is uneven. We'd expect to have 10 pixels of padding all the way around, but it doesn't look like that. Now why is that? This is because the P tag actually has some padding built in. So let's just have a look at that. If I get rid of that P tag there, and we'll just have the text, and then I refresh, okay, that makes a little bit more sense. We've lost the formatting because we don't have that class anymore, but we have now just 10 pixels to the left and 10 pixels at the top. But that was a little bit, I cheated a little bit there by taking away the P tag. So how do we get that same effect with the P tag still in there? So let's get back to that. We've still got this big margin at the top. Well, what we're going to need to do is set the margins and the paddings for the P tag to be 0, and then you can control what margins and paddings you want from the div itself. So let's just see how that works. We'll start by setting the padding to 0 all around. We don't need a pixels instruction when you have a padding of 0 because it's 0 whatever it is. You can put 0px, but it's unnecessary. You can just have padding is 0. So let's see how that changes things. It doesn't actually make any difference at all. So what we really want to do is change the margins of the P tag to 0. Fantastic. So that's now achieved what we've got. So the P tag has some default margins around it, which actually have the effect of moving everything down. Now this is, it's not a bad thing. If we do another P tag now, we'll just put some text in there and see how it looks. Save and refresh. That's actually fine, isn't it? It looks good. So, but the reason the P tag is there is the margin is there on the P tag is because we want to have a nice bit of space in between the different paragraphs. So there's a bit of margin at the top of the paragraph by default. So you can take that away, but you might find that then your paragraphs are a little bit close together. That's a decision that you'll need to make when you're designing your websites. But for now, we'll set everything to 0 so that we have a bit more control over what goes on. So back up to our padding instruction here. The padding is 10 pixels, and that's 10 pixels all the way around. So you won't be surprised to hear that you can do exactly the same as what we did for margins and look at setting the padding settings differently for the top, bottom, left, right, etc. So if I change the padding to 10 pixels, 100 pixels. So what actually happens if we only set 2 of the padding instructions? Well, what actually happens is it will repeat those 2 instructions. So the top padding will be 10 pixels up here. The right padding will be 10 pixels. Sorry, will be 100 pixels. And the bottom padding will be 10 pixels and the left padding will be 100. So if you just set 2 of them, then it will automatically repeat those 2. Let's see how that looks. Okay, so we now have 10 pixels at the top and 10 pixels at the bottom. The bottom padding actually doesn't make any difference because our text doesn't go all the way down there anyway. And the left and right padding are both 100 pixels. Now, something to notice there, if I take away that 100 pixels, you'll notice that the div itself actually gets smaller. So this is something that can actually cause a lot of trouble when you're trying to design a website, but it's definitely something worth keeping in mind, that when you add padding to a div or any element, you're actually adding to the width and height of that element. So this padding instruction of 10 pixels means that we've got 10 pixels on the top, 10 pixels on the bottom, and on the left and right. That means that the width and height of this div is actually now 220 pixels, not 200 pixels. Even though we've got a statement there that the height is 200 pixels, that's 200 pixels without the padding. So it's important to remember that if you're trying to get things to line up and they have different levels of padding, you're going to need different widths and heights to have effectively them looking the same. So that can cause problems, but as long as you know how it works, you can deal with it. So finally, we've got the same ability that we had with the margins to add a specific padding to just one side. So we can say padding left is 100 pixels. See how that looks? So we've now lost the padding at the top, and we've just got 100 pixels worth of padding at the top. Oh, that was not entirely true. Sorry, you'll notice we've got a little bit of padding at the top. So that's the default div padding. So that's how you add padding to your divs to space everything out nicely and give everything a lot of room. Okay, I'm getting a little bit bored with this layout that we've got here. We've been using it for a long time now. I want you to create 3 divs which are going to be all on the same line, so all floated left, and I want them all to be 100 pixels by 100 pixels, and I want the first one to have a red background, the second one to have a blue background, and the third to have a green background. Okay, so pause this video now, take a few minutes, have a go at that. I'll see you in a moment. All done? I hope so. I'm just going to run through that process for you in case you had any problems with it, but hopefully you've had a chance to practice a bit of floating and a bit of creating some divs. So let's get rid of the styles that we've got so far so that we can start from scratch and get rid of the content as well. Right, so I requested that we have 3 divs, 3 boxes. So we'll have the first one there. We'll put just a little bit of content in them. Oh, in fact, no, let's leave them blank. I put a space bar, a space just there, but we don't even really need that. So we're going to have 3 divs. They're all going to be 100 by 100. So why not just have a single style for divs, which is going to be width 100 px for 100 pixels and height 100 pixels. So that's going to affect every div that we have here, and that's fine because we're only going to have 3, and we know that we want all of them to be 100 pixels by 100 pixels. So let's now create those 2 other divs and just see how that looks. Okay, we can't see anything because they're all white, they don't have their backgrounds yet. So we said that we wanted one to be red, one to be blue, and one to be green. There we go. Now obviously those classes don't do anything until we define what they mean. So let's make our red div have a background color of red. And I'm going to copy and paste that to save you watching me type. So the blue div will have a background color of blue, and the green div will have a background color of green. Now I could have used IDs there. That would have been just as good because we know that we're only going to have one of each of these, but it doesn't make any difference. We'll stick with classes. Okay. So now we're getting close. We've got our 3 divs, but I did state that I wanted them to go along from left to right. So that's very easily done. We just make all of them float left. Great. There we go. We've achieved the job. I don't quite like the fact that they're all touching each other like that, so I'm going to pop in a margin of 20 pixels all the way around for all of them, just to space them out a little bit so we can see that they're separate divs. Great, so that looks good. Now this exercise is actually talking about borders. So now that we've got our divs, we're going to give them different types of borders. So we can refer to the red border. We'll start with a nice straightforward one. So to add a border to a div, or indeed any element, use the border instruction. Now the first thing you need to give to the border instruction is the width of the border. So let's say we'll have a 5 pixels border, and let's see what that looks like. Nothing at all. That's because we have to give a bit more information than just 5 pixels. We need to give it a color as well. So let's have a 5 pixel black border. Still nothing. Okay, there's a third bit of information that we need to give to the border instruction, and that is what type of border it is. So let's have a 5 pixel black solid border. Hurrah! We've finally got something that works. So a border, you'll notice again, adds to the width of the div. So this total div, including the border, is now 110 pixels wide and high, because it's got this 5 pixel border to the right, left, top and bottom. That's definitely something worth remembering. Of course you can play around with all of those things. So let's make it 20 pixels. Got a really wide border now. We could change the color, so we can have a yellow border. Lovely. Okay, let's keep that one like that, even though it looks pretty horrendous, and we'll use the blue and the green divs to investigate some other things that we can do with borders. Right, so we've changed the color of the border and the width. What happens if we change this solid? So solid just means a solid border with no dashes or anything like that, but we can change that to a number of different values to make a different type of border. I've got the w3schools.com border style page here, which gives you a list of the different ones that you can have. So let's just try a couple and see how they look. So we might have dashed. Let's go over here, put in a dashed border, see how that looks. Okay, so we might try a dotted border. Let's see how that looks. So it's dotted like that. So let's try a few others, see how they look. If we try it dashed, there we get this sort of effect. It might be clearer if we do a thinner border. Normally you're talking 3 or 4 pixels with borders rather than 20. So if we make that a 2 pixel border, then you get a clearer kind of dashed effect. What other ones shall we try? Well, let's try inset and ridge, just to give you an idea of how they look. So inset looks like that, kind of 3D effect, and then ridged looks like that, so a slightly thinner 3D border. So you can play around with those in your own time if you like. Check them out. Really, they're not very commonly used other than the solid one, because normally you want a nice clean border, but it's obviously completely up to you. You can do what you like. These are the values that you can use for CSS borders. Right, now what if we want to have a different border on the top, left, bottom and right? We can do all of that as well. And we'll do it on the blue one. So we'll leave the red div as it is, but the blue div will then introduce some new border tags. So this border tag has a lot of information in it already. It's got the width, it's got the color, and it's got the type of border. Now we want to use a different instruction. So we're going to call this border style. So this is where we're going to set our border style. So we've got ridge and all of the other ones. We can actually set it to be different on the top, bottom, left and right. So maybe we want ridge, solid, dotted and dashed. Just have a look at those. Yep, so ridge, solid, dotted and dashed. Great. Now if we have a look at that, look at that. We've got rigid at the top, solid on the right, dotted on the bottom, and dashed on the left. Nice. And you can see that it's defaulted to a black border there because we haven't actually given it a color or a width. So it's a black border of around 3 pixels or so. We can, of course, specify everything else as well. So border width, let's make that 10 pixels, 5 pixels, 3 pixels, and 1 pixel. This is going to look pretty horrendous, but there we go. So we've got a different border width on each side of the div, and we can, of course, if we really want to, specify a different border color for all of those as well. So let's have green, yellow, blue, and black. Lovely. Doesn't that look great? So I wouldn't generally recommend using these in actual websites, but you've got the power there to set the border as whatever you like on the top, left, bottom, and right. Okay, so what are we going to do with our green div? Well, we're going to use a related command called border radius. Now, the nice thing about border radius is it actually gives your div a nice curvy set of corners. So let's just see how that looks. Border radius 10 pixels. Lovely, very nice. So this is something that I definitely recommend using in your websites. It does just give a square div a nice sort of softer appearance. Of course, you can change that border radius to anything you like. Note some old browsers don't support the border radius tag. If you want to have a look at that in a bit more detail, then check out the link in the docs. I'm not going to go into it in that much detail here. So the border radius of 10 pixels. One final thing to show you is that you can actually create a circle very easily with border radiuses. So we just create the border radius of 50 pixels, and because that's exactly half of the height of the div, the border radius is just a quarter of a circle. So it's a very easy way to create a circle using pure HTML and CSS, no images required. Great, so now we're moving into the last section of the CSS part of the course, and we're going to be moving on from looking at colors and divs and layouts and more looking at text and the things that we can do with text with CSS. So we'll start with changing the font of text, which is something we haven't done at all yet. So I'm going to get rid of the content that we've got here. And we're just going to have a very simple paragraph with a good old "this is some text." Okay, let's refresh that. Great. There we go. So how do we change the font of that text? It's pretty easy. We use a CSS instruction. We're going to refer to all P elements for the moment because we don't have any classes or IDs. And we use the font family attribute. Whoops. Okay, now there are various different types of fonts. I'm going to show you the list on W3 Schools. You can find that list at this address, but I'll link to it in the docs for the course as well. So, font family, here we go. You've got two different types of fonts. I'm not going to go into great details about fonts in general, but there are serif fonts and there are sans serif fonts. So the serif fonts tend to be ones that have little, what are known as serifs. So they're little bits that sort of come out of the edge of the letter there. The idea is that they lead your eye on to the next letter and make the font more readable. More popular and common in websites these days is to use sans serif fonts. They tend to look a little bit more modern. The final type there is monospace fonts like Courier, which you often use when you're coding because they have all of the characters are exactly the same width, whereas most other fonts are not going to be the same width. So if you write 2 lines with the same number of letters but different characters in them, in these 2 fonts, those 2 lines will have different lengths, whereas in a monospace font they won't, they'll be the same length. So normally we're focusing on serif or sans serif fonts. So let's have a look at the different types. These are what's known as web-safe fonts. So if you use these fonts, you're going to be guaranteed that any browser that the user is using is going to have those fonts. Now, there are various ways to add extra fonts into your website if the ones here are not what you want, or you want to use something else, but we'll go into that later on in the course. We won't look at that right now. So you've got a nice list there looking at the sans serif ones. We've got Arial and Arial Black, etc, etc. You can read those for yourself. Now you will notice that all of them have a font name, and then a more general font name, and then the type of font there. Now the reason for that is when you state your font, you have these second and third, and in some case fourth options as a backup. So if in the unlikely event that the browser doesn't have this particular font, then it will look for this font, and if it doesn't have that font, it will look for that font, and if it doesn't have that font, it will look for, in this case, just a generic serif font. So that means that even if the machine that your user is using doesn't have the font that you want them to use, it'll have the closest possible font to that. So that's why we have several different font instructions, and they tend to be just so that they're backups if the user doesn't have the font that you actually want. So let's try some of these out. You'll notice that the default option that we use is a serif font there. So let's try a sans serif one. I'm just going to copy and paste here so that it's clear that I've got it right, but I don't want to copy and paste that one because that's a serif font. So let's copy and paste this Arial. Okay, so I want the font family to be Arial. And if we haven't got our Arial, we'll use Helvetica, and then we'll use just a sans serif font if we haven't got that. So let's see what effect that has. Hey, so we've got a nice sans serif font there. I think that's a bit nicer to look at myself. It's definitely more modern, in many ways more stylish than the font that we had before. So there's not much more to say really about fonts. I would take a couple of minutes to just try out a few of these fonts from the W3 schools, just type them in or copy and paste them, and see how they look with the different fonts. Right, now we know how to set the font of a text. We're going to look at styling the text a little bit more. Now, we've already seen a few ways to do this, so I'll cover those first, and then we'll go on to some new things. So here we have what we had at the end of last lesson, which was just some basic text in paragraph tags and a font family of Arial. So let's just do a couple of simple things with that. We might want to make some of it bold. That's easy enough. We use the font weight command there. So font weight is bold. Let's have a look at that. There we go. So we've got some nice bold text there. In fact, maybe what we'll do is we'll create a paragraph for each of these so that you've got a nice reference to refer to when you need to. So I suggest you follow along and type these, but you can download it in the docs as well. So there we go, we've got some normal text and we've got some bold text. We can make text italic using the font style command, so I'll just call that an italic class. Font style italic, like that. Oops, yep, let's update the text there. This is some italic text. Fantastic. We've already looked at colors. So to set the color, you just use color is green, or whatever it might be. You can of course use the HTML codes there if you want as well. We can underline some text. I'll just remind you of the span tag. To show you how we can refer to text within a paragraph. Oops, notice I got that the wrong way around. So dot underline. We use the text decoration instruction. So text decoration is underline. There we go, and then we've got that underlined. Fantastic. Now we can change the font size as well. Let's go in and change some of these. So if we change this to font size is 200%. What that will do is it will make it twice as large as the text would otherwise have been. So it's twice as large as the that bold paragraph would otherwise have been. So that's what's called a relative font size. We're making the size relative to what it would otherwise have been. You might also want an absolute font size, in which case you specify it in terms of pixels. So that's 20 pixels. The default font size in most browsers is 16 pixels. So if we set it to 16 pixels, it'll be the same size as it would be if we didn't set the font size at all. So there is some debate in web design circles as to whether you use pixels or percentages. There is a third option as well, known as EM. So if we try a font size of 2EM, like that, that makes it quite large. So 1 EM is actually the same as 16 pixels. So 1 EM is the standard font size in most browsers. So if you just change that slightly, it will make it slightly bigger, etc. So that's very similar to using the percentage command. The reason that some people prefer using the relative sizes is when you resize your text in some browsers. If the text is defined in an absolute way, so say 10 pixels, then it won't necessarily resize nicely. Chrome works pretty well, so that actually works nicely, but sometimes you do get problems. So that's one for you to investigate, but it depends on the particular nature of the project. But really you can use percentages or pixels, whichever works for your project. So that's all we're going to look at specifically in terms of the text styling, but I'll just lead you to a bit of further reading if you like. The W3 Schools font page is really useful, so they've got a couple of extra things there. There's the oblique font style, which is very rarely used, but you can try that out if you like. A bit of a discussion of what type of font size to use, relative versus absolute, etc. And the text page is useful as well. So they talk about colors there. We'll talk about text align in the next video. A bit of text decoration, so some rarely used options, but you can use overline and line through as well if you want. And if you want to instruct by CSS that a particular bit of text should be uppercase, you can just use that text transform option there. And we've got the text indent option, which allows you to indent just the first line of a paragraph of text. So you can play around with those and then go on to have a look at text align in the next video. Right, so we've looked at styling text and a number of different ways to do that. We're now going to look at aligning text. So essentially left, center and right, and we'll also look at the justified option as well. So in order to do that, it'll be a lot clearer if we create a couple of divs so we can see exactly what our text is being aligned to. And for the moment we'll take away this p tag as well. Okay, so we'll call this green box. And I'm going to keep the Arial font family because I like it, but green box will just make nice and clear width 300 pixels, height 200 pixels, and background color green. Okay, great. I think that's a little taller than we need it to be. Let's make it 50 pixels tall. Sorry. Okay, so we've got our box. So by default, of course, text is left aligned. So if we want to make it right aligned, it's extremely simple. We just do text align right. Save that. Excellent. And it's right aligned. So anything inside that div will be right aligned now. Now, if I put a paragraph tag back in around our text, it's still to the right. You'll notice that brought in the Arial font as well. So that shows you an idea of inheritance, which we've discussed briefly before, that if you've got a tag within another tag, so a p tag within a div tag, then by default the p tag will take on the style properties of the div tag. So if I set the div tag to align right, then the text will align right as well. And of course we can change that to align center, and that will then center the text very nicely for us. We could also put that instruction in the p tag. That works just as well. So just so that you can see the difference, if we make it text align right, we've actually aligned everything right. And notice that the p tag which is inside the div aligns to the right of the div, and the p tag, the other two p tags, align to the right of the whole page because they're not inside a div. So when you use the align tag, it will align it relatively to what's called the parent element. So with this p tag, the parent element is the div, so it aligns to the right of the div. With this p tag, the parent element is actually the body, because that's the one that the p tag is inside, so it will align to the right of the body, which is the whole page, essentially. Let's just see what effect the justified instruction has. We can set the text align to justify for the green box. We'll get rid of this conflicting text align right instruction. So now everything is aligned to the left. You can't see any difference at the moment from a normal left align. So we actually need to put some more text in there. So I'll just copy and paste that a few times, and then we'll see how that looks. So what the justifying has done there is it's stretched the text out so it always aligns nicely from left to right, which is the effect that you get in most books that you read. So this can be a nice thing to use quite often, but it does have the result of the spacing between the words being slightly different. That can be confusing in some cases. So use it sparingly, but that's how you justify text. Well done for making it to the last video in the Learning CSS section of this course. We're just going to look at a few special selectors that we can use to control links and the way that they appear, and then we'll get on with the project for the CSS bit of the course. Okay, so let's get rid of this content that we have here and just have a simple link that will link to Google.com. Okay, great. So let's just check that. Fantastic. While we're here, I'll show you an easy way to get a link to open in a new tab, which will be useful for this part. All we do is add an attribute to the link, which is target equals _blank. Let's have a look at that and see what effect that has. Google now opens up in a new tag, so that's quite nice if you've got some links on your website that you want to link to somewhere else that isn't within your website. It can be nice to open that in a new tab. Right, you'll notice that this link is actually purple. That's because I've been to the Google homepage before, and my browser knows that, and so it has given that link a particular property, particular color according to that. So if you want to control what that color is going to be, then you use the colon selector there. So we've got A selects every link in the document, and visited means that we've actually been to that link. So if I want all visited links to have a color of green, I can do that, and that link has now gone green. So if I can think of a website that I haven't been to before, I probably haven't been to google.se. Okay, so that link now comes up as blue, which is the normal link color. If I then click on that and I go back and look at it, it's now green because I've visited that link. So that's how you style a link that shows that the user has been somewhere. You can also style the hover color, let's say, of a link. Or let's just do something interesting. Let's make it a font size of 50 pixels. If I refresh that, then that's quite nice. As soon as I hover over one of those links, they become much bigger. Of course, you can choose any styling you like for that. A different color as usual, but you can change the font size, you could change the font decoration, anything you liked. Okay, again, there's a link for a bit more information of other things you can do with links, but those are the most two common things that we want to style. So without further ado, let's get on with the project for the CSS section of the course. Okay, let's get started with trying to make a clone of the BBC News website, or at least the top part of it. So here it is. Here's how it looks. I'm going to start with the index.html file that we've been working on throughout this course. It's in Text Wrangler here. So if I go to the desktop and open that up in Text Wrangler, there it is. So I'm going to rename it, save as, and we'll call it bbc.html. We'll change the title to, I'm going to call it Rob's BBC, so I can tell the difference between that one. And we'll keep the styles. We'll do those inline, or internally, sorry. And there we go. So we've got our basic BBC website with no actual content on it. Let's get rid of that and that. Okay, great. So let's start from the top and work our way down. You'll notice that there are two bars that go all the way along from left to right. This sort of dark red bar and a lighter red bar there. So let's start by doing a bar that goes all the way across, which has that dark red color. In order to get that dark red color, I'm going to use an extension for Chrome called Colorzilla. There are lots of similar extensions and similar ones for Firefox and Internet Explorer as well if you want. All they do is allow you to pick colors from the page. So you just hover it over and you can find out the HTML code of any color, which is very handy when you're doing something like this. So there we go. That's the color that I want. So let's switch over to our BBC file. I'm going to create a container div. This is generally good practice to put all of your website content into a single container. It just gives you a bit more control over what goes or what styles are in your website compared to the full body of the page itself. So let's call this the top bar. I'm using an ID here because there's only one top bar, so it's appropriate to use an ID tag rather than a class, which I would use if there were more than one of them. I'm also trying to indent, keep everything nice and clear. There we go. Right, so let's make some styles for my top bar. The main one that I want is I want the background color to be 100%. Oh no, I don't want the background color to be 100%. I want the background color to be that I've copied and pasted. I want the width to be 100%. Okay, so let's see what that looks like on its own. So let's open it up with Google Chrome. Nothing at all is there at the moment. Not a problem. So the reason there's nothing there, we first need to add a height for this div. There we go. Now we've got a bar which looks fairly similar. It's maybe a little bit too short. Maybe I'll go for let's say 45 pixels. Now I could go back into the BBC News website and work out exactly how tall that is, but this is just a learning exercise. I don't want this video to be 5 hours long, so I'm going to make things reasonably approximate. So it will look good, but it won't be exactly the same, and that's fine. So I think that's now about right. The main problem we have here is that, as you can see, there's a margin there. We've got a margin around the edge of the div, which we don't want. So to get rid of that, that is most likely a default margin from the body tag. So if we set the body tag margin to be 0, there we go. Then we've got rid of that. So it's now bleeding all the way to the edge, which is great. Let's just have a look at those heights again. Maybe we should make it slightly smaller. Let's say 40 pixels, and we'll see how we go from there. Okay. Now the next thing to notice is that the BBC website, like a lot of websites, has a fixed width portion in the middle, which stays the same width no matter how wide your browser window is. Even if you make the browser window smaller, it's still that width. And then when you have a nice wide browser window, then it stretches these parts, the red bits at the top, to the very edge to give it a bit more space. So we're going to try and recreate that effect as well. The way we do it is we have a div inside our top bar div, and this I'm going to give a class of fixed width. Now the reason I'm giving it a class rather than ID is because we're going to need to use this again when we create our the lighter red portion, and again when we create the white portion with the actual news on it beneath. So I'm using a class so that I can use my class several times. So going up here, fixed width, I'm using a dot because it's a class, not an ID. And I need to add a width. I'm guessing it's somewhere around 1,000 pixels. And now to make it actually centered, there's a nice trick that does this. Margin 0 auto sets the margins automatically, and that centers a div within another div. So let's just make sure that that's working. We can't actually see anything at the moment because it doesn't have a background, so let's give it a background color of blue. Yeah, we still can't see anything because it doesn't have any content. Well, we can at least just add some text there. There we go. So that's nice. You can see that's working well. There, we've got that fixed width idea. Maybe it's a little bit too thin. Yeah, BBC definitely looks a little bit wider than that, so maybe we'll go for 1,200 for our fixed width portion. We'll just have a little look at that. Oh, a little too wide, I think. Let's say 1,100. Maybe a touch too wide. Call it 1,050. Great. Okay. Right, so now we're working from top to bottom. Let's work from left to right. So we want to get this BBC logo there. I'm not going to try and recreate that with text. I'm going to use the Mac screenshotting tool to get this logo. And it's nice and easy on a Mac. You use Command-Shift-4, and that just turns your cursor into a selecting tool, and then you select the logo there. That then saves it straight away to your desktop. There it is. So I'm going to rename that to BBC logo. and I'm going to go into my websites, into the CSS folder, and create a new folder called images. And that's generally considered good practice as well, that you keep all your images in an image folder, and that just keeps everything nice and ordered. Okay, great. Let's get everything back in the middle. Okay, so how can we get this image into our website? I'm going to get rid of this background color as blue because I don't need it anymore. And I'm going to get rid of the SDF as well. So I'm going to create a new div, and I'm going to call it logo div. And inside that div, I'm going to have the image. So img src, remember source code is, or source address is images, and it was logo.png was the name of the file. So let's just have a look, see how that works. It doesn't. What have I done wrong? Images, I called it BBC logo.png. Let's try that again. Great, okay. Excellent, we're looking pretty good. Now we definitely need to move that down a little bit. So let's give it a little bit of padding. So the logo div there will create a new rule for that, and we'll have padding top. Not much, I don't think. Maybe 8 pixels. Let's see how that looks. Oh, bit too much. 5 pixels, pretty good. Okay, that's pretty nice. Now, what's going to happen if we add a new div there is it's going to be below that div, which we don't want. So we're also going to need to make this logo div float left. All right. You'll notice also that there's a line just to the right, a nice sort of subtle divider there that separates the BBC logo from the sign in part of the menu. I think the color of that is the same as the color of the lighter red part. So I'm going to select that color, and I'm going to do a right border on this div to achieve that. So we'll say border right 1px solid and that color. See how that looks. Okay, not bad, but it's definitely way too close to the BBC logo itself. So we need some padding on the right as well. Let's have 30 pixels. Let's see how that goes. Okay. Not bad. We do need that to be a little bit closer, don't we? Maybe 20 pixels. Or maybe even less than that. 10 will probably do the job. Okay. Excellent. Right, so moving along. Let's get a little screenshot of that sign in symbol. There, so same trick as before, Command Shift 4 on a Mac, or you can use the snipper tool on Windows as well. I'm going to call that sign in, and I'm going to drag it into the images section of the folder structure for the site. Great, back to Text Wrangler. So after our logo div, let's just space that out a little bit. We're going to have, now what I think I'll do is I will treat this div separately to all of these divs, because it's a slightly different style, and then we'll have all of those ones in a single div as a list. So this is going to be, whoops, have an ID of sign in div. There's definitely only going to be one of these. And we'll start by putting that image in there. Images sign in.png. Let's just see how that looks. Okay, it's there. It's obviously too high up, so we need to move it down and across a little bit. But just before we do that, let's put some text in as well, and then possibly we can move the whole thing in one go. So sign in. Okay, so we need to do something with that text. We definitely need to change the color. Is there anything in particular we want to do with colors throughout? Probably not. No, okay, but we can definitely see that everything on the top part, apart from that search bit of text, is in white. So let's say everything within the top bar, we want to have a color of white. Excellent, so we've got the text the right color. One problem is it's not the right font. So getting fonts on a website is reasonably straightforward. Going to the developer tools, we should be able to view the actual content of the site, and there we go. Look, if you look at the body tag, it's got the font right there, so that's handy. It's likely that the website actually uses a number of different fonts, but for our purposes we'll keep it the same, keep things simple. So we'll make the font family that. Okay, fine. I think we need it a little bit smaller and possibly bold. So let's have a new set of instructions for our sign in div. So let's make it bold. And let's make it 0.7 EM. Remember, 1 EM is the same as the default, so 0.7 should be a little bit smaller. Okay, I'm not liking that font. It's not looking similar enough for my liking. So maybe we can find a different font. Here we go, Arial Helvetica Sans Serif. So all I did there was click on the magnifying glass, then clicked on the sign in text and searched for the font of that particular text. So with any luck, this will give us a closer approximation to that font. Yeah, that's a lot better. Great. Okay, and now we need to make it a little bit bigger. Maybe even we don't need to resize it at all. Let's see. Okay, just a little. Let's go for 0.9 EMs. Okay, nice. We're getting there. So we need to move both of those down a little. So let's introduce some padding to the sign-in div. So we definitely want some padding at the top. We used 5 pixels before. I think we're going to need more than that this time. So let's have 10 pixels at the top. While we're here, we're going to need quite a lot of padding on the right. So let's guess at around 80 pixels on the right. We don't need to worry about padding on the bottom because it's going to be aligned from the top, and we definitely want a fair bit of padding from the left as well. So let's try 0 on the bottom and 20 px on the left. Okay, that's looking good. I think that's nicely aligned, but this sign in is a little bit low. So we definitely want to move that up a little bit. Let's try 6 pixels. Yeah, I think that looks good. Now that image then we're going to need to move down in order to make that work. So what we'll do, we'll select the image within the sign in div, which we do like that. So sign in div and then image. This will affect every image within the sign in div. And what we'll do, we'll just give that a margin top of, let's try 5 pixels. That should shift it down a little bit. But we only want the image to move down, so we can try a padding instead. No, that has the same effect. Okay, so what we'll do, we'll use a relative positioning instead. So position relative and top 5 pixels. That means that the symbol itself will move down, but the text won't. So I think that's good. I think we've possibly moved it slightly too far, so let's go back up just. So we'll just go 3 pixels. I think that's good. It's slightly higher up, which is what we want. Now we do need some more padding on the left, definitely. So where were we here? 20 pixels. Let's make that 50 pixels. Right, we're not getting any padding on the left. Why not? 6 pixels down. Let's just try making that 0 on the right. That's strange. It's not keen to give us our padding. Okay, not a problem. So we'll make this just, well, we'll leave that as it is for now actually. And we'll have, so I've just put that in a pair of P tags. So all the P's within the sign-in div will be affected by this. So we can just make it, give the P tag a margin left of 20 pixels. Right, so the sign-in div is going to need a border on the right. You can see that there. So let's create okay, so it's made it a pretty big div. So let's restrict that width to maybe 200 pixels. See how that looks. Okay, that's about right. Now you can see what's happened here. We've got a problem because the padding that we've added in has made it slightly taller than it would otherwise be. So that border, therefore, is sticking out the side there. So we don't want that. Let's get rid of this padding. And we'll try a bit of relative positioning instead. So we'll make the width 200 pixels and the height 100%. And we'll just stop the video there, and we'll carry on in the next video. Right, so picking up where we left off, we have got the BBC logo nicely in this top bar here, and we've got the beginnings of our sign-in area with the little sign-in logo there as well. So we were looking at getting some padding put in to the left of this div here. Just before we do that, we're going to need to float that div left as well, because we want all of these to float to the left and be on the same line essentially. So let's just see how that looks. Okay, we've now got our padding. I think we've probably padded it a little bit too far. So let's change the left padding there to 20 pixels. Okay. That's looking pretty good, I think. Great. Now we're going to need this border on the right of this div as well. So it's going to be the same type of border that we used before. Let's just have a look, see how that works. Okay, now that's good. It's about in the right place. But you can see it's not quite tall enough. Now that's because we haven't got any padding on the bottom, which means that our div doesn't actually go all the way to the bottom. The div stops there. So there's a couple of ways we can get around that. I think probably the easiest way is just to add some padding on the bottom here until it all matches up nicely. That's pretty good. I think we need a couple more pixels. Great. Nice, that's all the way down to the bottom. I'm just zooming in there. That's a useful thing to do when you want to make sure that everything matches up nicely. Okay, so now we've got our sign-in div. We need to start doing these extra divs here, so news, sport, weather, etc, etc. I'm not going to do those as separate divs because they all have a very similar pattern. I'm actually going to do these as an unordered list. So let me show you how we're going to do that. So underneath our sign-in div, we'll have another containing div, and we'll call it top menu div, and we'll close that div there. And the only thing so far that we need for the top menu div is that it should float left with all the other divs. Okay, now so within this we're going to have an unordered list, which so far we've seen is mostly a bullet point list, but actually it can be much more powerful than that, and we can use it for a variety of different things, and it's very commonly used for menus and things like this essentially. So let's just start with our first one. So news is going to be our first list, so we'll save that, see how it looks. Okay, not great. So we need to first of all get rid of the bullet point and then work out our padding, etc, etc. So what we do, we want to get together all the LIs in the top menu div, and we want to change the list style to none. So if I do that, that should take away the bullet point there. Very nice. Okay, that's great. Now we want to move this around a little bit. I think it's about the right size. Maybe we could have a bold to get it a little closer to the look there, and probably a little bit smaller as well. So we'll say font size 0.9 EM. Okay, now that's good. It's a little bit too far down, I think, so let's see what's going on here. I suspect the LI is putting in some automatic margins. Nope, it's not that. What about padding? No, it's not that either. Okay, let's have a look at the top menu div UL. See what that's doing. See if there's some margins being set there. I'll just get rid of that padding. Okay, so there we've got our margin at the top sorted. So we want to move that down a little bit. So let's change that to, let's say margin top 5 pixels. See how that looks. Okay, a little bit further down, I think 10 pixels. Okay, looks good. Now I've got slightly too much space on the left, I think, so let's find out what's causing that. Possibly some padding in that div there. Possibly a margin in that div there. Nope. Okay. Let's just have a look at the padding here. Okay. Excellent. So sometimes you need to sort of fiddle around a little bit to get an idea of what's causing everything to display in the way that it is. So that's good. So let's change the padding to the left to be, in fact we're going to need some more padding, I suspect. So let's have 0 on the top. Let's have 20 pixels on the right. 0 on the bottom for now, but we'll probably change that, and another 20 on the left. Okay, so that looks about right in terms of padding on the left, and so it should be okay at padding on the right as well, but we're going to need a border on the right as well at the end of each LI. Okay, so you can see the borders appeared there, but we don't really want it there. We want it further out. So I think what we're going to need to do is move this padding down, and we'll put the padding on the LI instead of the UL. So we want the padding on each individual list item, not on each UL. So let's see how that looks. Okay, so we've got 0 padding there, that's great, but we do want some padding here. Oops. Missing semicolons can cause all sorts of issues. Okay. Great. So now we've got that padding on the right there. That's great. So now we're going to need to actually get rid of this margin top up here, because we want this border to be on the right of each LI, and this margin top means that the LI actually starts about here, which we don't want. So let's change the margin for the UL to be 0, and we'll put the padding in instead for the LI. Okay, great. Now we're going to need to add some padding at the bottom as well to make it go all the way down. Another couple of pixels. Let's just zoom in. That looks great. Okay, fantastic. So now the nice thing about that is we don't need to style the rest of them. All we need to do is copy and paste them all in. So what have we got? Sport, weather, iPlayer, TV, radio. I'll type those in as quickly as I can. Just copying and pasting here. So sport, weather, iPlayer, TV. I need 2 more. Radio and more. Oops, that hasn't worked. Ah, interesting. So what's gone on there? So pause the video for a second and see if you can figure out why on earth it's done that. Did you get it? Well, what's actually happened is each of the list items has floated beneath each other because I haven't told them to float left. And the reason you can't see any of the words is because they're all in white. So they're there, but they're all in white. So that should be an easy fix. Just a matter of floating each list item to the left. There we go. Great, it's beginning to take shape now and actually look reasonably like the top part of the BBC website. Okay, great. So now we've just got this search bar to fill in, and that should be simple enough. So that we're going to use a separate div. So to put the search box in, we'll have a new div, I think, for that. So we'll call it search div. Again, I'm using IDs all the way here because I know there's only going to be one of each of these. And in that search div, we're going to want an input box with a type of text. So let's just save that and see how it looks. Oof, not great. Okay, so we're going to need to see what's going on. Okay. So there's our search box. It's not too bad. We do need to move that, give it a bit of padding, make it a little bit wider, and get this search word in there as well. So how are we going to do that? Well, let's first of all get our search div floated to the left. And we'll give it a bit of padding as well. Let's guess at around 8 pixels. Okay, not bad. I think it does need to be a bit taller, that input, doesn't it? So we'll grab the search div input and we'll change the height to, let's try 25 pixels. Okay, that hasn't made much difference. Just try 35 pixels. That hasn't made much difference at all either. So search div. Oops. See, I'm keeping all the errors in on purpose because, yep, you'll come across these, I'm sure. Miss out an R and everything goes mysteriously wrong. Right, so now it's too tall. So let's go back to my 25 pixels that I thought would be about right. Yeah, I think that's probably about right. I think we need then a little bit less padding. So let's try 5 pixels. Yeah, that looks good. I think we need a little bit more padding on the left, maybe. So we'll have 5 pixels on the top. We'll sort out the right and bottom padding if we need to later on, and we'll have 10 pixels on the left. Okay, that looks nice. Now, this has no border as far as I can see, so we're going to turn off the border by saying border is none. Okay, that looks good. And now if we start writing there, we definitely want that text to be a little bit bigger. And we're going to want a bit of padding there as well, I think. So let's put a bit of padding, maybe 3 pixels for now. Okay. And I think we want a little bit more padding on the left. So, and we also want the font size to be a little bit bigger. So we'll go for 1.2 EMs, and we'll have the padding as 3 pixels on the top, 0 on the right, 3 pixels on the bottom, and then 10 pixels on the left. And now we've lost it completely. Why is that? Let's just get rid of that. And we get it back. So let's add those one by one. So font size 1.2 EMs. Oh, it doesn't like that for some reason. Okay, let's try putting in an absolute font size. Ah, there we go. Okay, so the font size was too large. So let's make it a bit smaller. Okay, that's better. Okay, that's nice. I'm liking that, but we do need our padding. So let's change padding left to 20 pixels. A little too much. 10 pixels. Great. Okay. Last but not least, we need that search to go in there, but we want the search text to disappear, so we use the placeholder option there. Nice. Okay. Right, so the last thing on this line is we want that nice little magnifying glass there, which just makes it really clear that that's what we want to do. We want to search. And the way I'm going to do that, again, there's a number of different ways to do it, but I'm just going to show you one. This is actually a new bit of CSS that we haven't seen before. So I will take a screenshot of that in the same way that I did the others. There it is. We'll call it magnify. And I'll just drop that into the images folder so I can refer to it. Bring this back. And so what we're going to do is we're going to set this magnifying glass as a background image on the actual input itself. So let's see how we do that. We go up to the input and we set background image to, we want to give it a URL, and the URL is images/magnify.png. Okay, let's switch back over to here. Aha! Right, so it's a start, but it's not exactly what we want. So I'll link this up in the doc for the course, but if you want to have a look at background images in a bit more detail, again, W3 Schools has got a really nice few pages on it. Particularly what we want to do, we want to do two things. We want to align the image to the right, so we want to have it just over here, and we want it not to repeat. So if we have a look down here, we can see where to do that. So let's stop it repeating first. So we want to set background repeat to none. We don't want any repeating at all. So this is the option that we want: background image, no repeat. So I'll just copy and paste that, background repeat, to be no repeat. Okay, let's have a look. So great, so now we've only got it once, but we do want to decide where it's going to be. There's a couple of different ways we could do this once again. So first of all, we'll look at background position. So that option allows you to center the background. You can align it to the right, the bottom, etc., etc. I think we'll go for aligning it to the right and centering it. That makes the most sense to me. So again, let's copy and paste. Background position, right and vertically centered. Okay, that looks pretty good. Fantastic. So I'm happy with that top line. As I've said, it's not exactly the same as the BBC's, but it's pretty similar, and it'll get the job done for now. So I'm going to pause the video there, and then we'll restart again and look at doing this lighter red bar next. So we're doing pretty well. We've got our top bar of the BBC webpage pretty much down. And we're now going to create this lighter red bar. So it's got a similar setup overall to the top bar, in that we want a 100% div which has a nice background, and then a fixed width div within that. So what we're going to do is we're going to move this up here so you can see the whole thing. We're going to copy and paste the whole top bar div, but we're going to get rid of the content, because what we really want is the top bar and the fixed width parts, but we want to call it something else, so let's call it news bar. And let's take the top bar set of instructions there and copy and paste them to the news bar div. Now, just before we look at that, we're going to need to break the floats, because we want this div to be vertically beneath the previous div. We don't want it floated to the left. So see if you can remember how to do that from last time. Did you remember? We put in a div with a certain class, just an empty div, and then we give that class the instruction clear both. Okay, so now if we have a look, see what effect that does. That's great. So we've got a second bar now. Obviously at the moment it's the same color as the first, which we don't want. So I'm going to use my dropper tool again to get the color of that background. There it is. And I'm going to replace the background color of my news bar to that. Let's have a look. Okay, great. Obviously this div is a little bit taller, so let's try a height of 100 pixels. Maybe a little too much. Maybe 80 pixels. Yeah, okay, We'll see how it goes. Okay, great. So we've got our basic structure. That's fine. So now within our first fixed width part of the div, we're going to want to put in news. Now they've used an image there, I think, for the news area, and text for the UK. We'll use text for both. It won't look exactly the same, but it'll be similar enough. So within our fixed width part, we'll have, let's put it just straight away in a p tag. We'll get rid of that. And we'll do it all in capitals /p, apart from the p. And we'll have the UK in a special span. Okay, so we'll call this PID is news header, and span we'll just call it UK. So then we just need to play around with both of those and make them look nice. Okay, so we've got a few issues straight away there. So our news bar P, we're going to want to take away any kind of margin and padding to stop that problem. There we go. So now we've got rid of that gap there. We definitely want to bring it down a fair bit, and the news we want quite a bit larger, and the UK a little bit smaller, but still larger than that. Okay, so I've forgotten what I called it now. News header. So news header, we'll make a font size, let's try 3 EM, see how that looks. Okay, that's actually about right for the news. Great. And for the UK, we want the font size to be, let's try 2 EM. Okay. What that's doing is it's making it too relative to what it would otherwise have been. So the UK actually turns out bigger, so we don't want that. Let's use 0.5 EM. Okay, we've got the right kind of structure now. I think the UK is a little bit too small. So let's make it 0.7. That's about right. Okay, and then all we need now is a little bit of padding. So let's put a bit of padding on the top and a bit of padding on the left as well for news. So I think in the news header we can have some padding on the top. Let's try 10 pixels. I think maybe there already was a padding of 10 pixels. Let's just crank it up to 30 pixels. Sorry. I meant to put it on the news bar P there. Okay, moved it down slightly too far. 15 pixels, okay, a little bit less I think. So that 10 pixels was about right. Okay, and I think we need to move the news slightly to the right. So we'll give it a padding left of, let's try 10 pixels again. Nope, okay. Sorry, let's put it in here instead. Okay, nice. That's just indented it a little bit. Actually, I'm not sure if we want that. No, it can actually be vertically under the BBC. So that's fine. We'll get rid of that padding left. But we definitely do want a padding left or a margin left for the UK, because we want to give them a bit of division between them. So news, UK. That's fine. So you can see they've used a slightly different font here, which is why they've gone for an image. But we're not aiming for perfect reproduction here. I think what we've got is similar enough. Right, so now before we go on to this menu, let's get this RSS bit looking nice. So what we're going to want to do is have a new div. We'll call it RSS. And the main thing about that div is we want it floated to the right. And we'll put the text RSS in there just to have a look. Okay, great. So that's it's in roughly the right place, but you can see it's put it underneath the P tag there. So to avoid that, let's float the P tag to the left. Great. Okay, so now I've got it at the top. We still need to move it down a bit and make it nice and centered. So let's give it a bit of a margin of, let's try 30 pixels, see how that looks. Oh, that's about right. Okay, that's fine. So we just need to add in the little RSS logo there. I'm just going to take it directly from the page with my screenshotting tool. That'll do. So there it is. I'll call it RSS and we'll drag it into images there. Bring this back and back to here. So we want it on the right of the text, so we'll just put it straight in. Images / rss.png. Nice. Okay, a little bit too large, so we'll do a bit of CSS for that. So RSS image, and we want the height to be, let's try 16 pixels. Okay, slightly too tall. Let's try 14. Okay, nice. Looking pretty good. Again, not exactly the same, but close enough for our purposes. Right, so we've got the news, UK and RSS bits in there. Actually, I'm just looking at that and thinking that RSS is quite nicely aligned with the bottom of the news and the UK. So I think I'm going to bring it down a little bit, because I think that's quite an important part of the design there. Maybe a little bit further. You can do this more accurately yourself if you like, but I think that's, yeah, that looks nicer. Right, we're going to need a bit more room now, aren't we, beneath the news and the UK to fit this in. So let's increase the height of the news bar. We'll go for 90 pixels for now. Okay, so again, similarly to this menu bar up here, we're going to implement this as a UL list, so unordered list, and let's see how we're going to do that. So we're going to want this beneath what we've just put in there, so we're going to want to break the floats that we've created. Oops, put that in there. And we'll call this topic menu. Okay, and again we're going to have a UL unordered list and a set of LIs in there. The first one will be home. So without any styling at all, that looks like that. Not ideal. So the main thing we're going to need to do is the same as before. We're going to want to float everything to the left. This time we're going to want a nice background as well. So let's use our color picker to get that color. There it is. And then let's fix topic menu. In fact, I think we'll probably leave that blank for the moment and have topic menu UL. We'll give that the background color. Okay, so we're getting there. We definitely want to get rid of that bullet point there. So we'll have a topic menu LI. Do you remember how to do this? Hope you got it. List style none. Lovely. Now we want to sort out the padding there again. So let's just set the padding and the margin of the UL to be 0. Okay. And then we can put in our own padding later on. Now, how were we with the... I think we want to move that down slightly, so we'll do that in a second. I think we want the text to be a little bit smaller, and we definitely want a bit of padding in the LIs there. So let's try a font size of 0.8 EM and a padding of 4 pixels. Okay, it's getting there. Let's change the padding to 5 pixels, give it a bit more room. Okay, I think that's pretty close. And as it happens, that actually lines up beautifully with the bottom of our div as well. So that's great. Okay, now we've got a nice little border again there. This time the border doesn't actually go to the top and bottom of the whole UL. So I think we should just be able to put in the same instruction that we had before. Okay, you can see what's happened there is we've got the padding is in the LI, so that means that the border to the right is actually stretching all the way up, which is not quite what we want. So let's put the padding in the UL this time, or at least the top and bottom padding in the UL. There we go, we're getting there. We may need to specify no background color there. Okay, we're getting closer. So we need to specify a height for the UL. So let's try a height of 20 pixels. Okay, that looks nice. Now we need to get that color back. For our right border. Great. Now I think we definitely need a little bit more padding on the left and right there. So we'll have padding 0 for the top, and then let's try 10px, 0 at the bottom, and then 10px on the left as well. Okay, now we're getting there. I think that looks pretty nice. Pretty close, maybe slightly too much padding. Let's change it to a 6. Both sides. Great. Okay. So I'm now going to copy and paste all of this text to make my other LIs. You can fast forward this bit if you like. It's just going to be a lot of copying and pasting. There we go. So we'll put an LI in front of each of those. And a closing LI around each of those as well. And we'll just do some nice indenting. I'm going to copy and paste that as well to move everything in. Okay, nice. Fits pretty well. Looking on the right, there's no border on entertainment and arts there. So what we're going to do, we're going to have a cheeky bit of inline CSS, and we're just going to set the border right property to none. Excellent, that's gone. So the only thing I think we need to change here is we need to add in a different background for this UK to show that the UK is selected there. So let's see what we can do to make that happen. We'll give the UK a special class, a class of selected. And then we'll give it a background color. Looks like white to me, but it might be slightly off-white. So let's just have a look. Yeah, it's slightly off-white. Okay. So now we've got that. We also want to change the text color so that it shows up. So we'll have that dark grey as the text color. Okay, now that's fine, but it's not stretching to the top and the bottom, which is a bit of a shame. So we're going to use a bit of a CSS hack to do that. What we'll do, we'll give it a greater height than the rest. So let's try a height of 20 pixels. So that's stretched out nicely now. It's gone further down, but we're going to need to move it up a little bit as well. So we'll give it a relative position, and let's try moving it up by 5 pixels. Okay, we're getting there. That's slightly too far. Maybe 3 pixels. Let's zoom in to get this really accurate. I think 4 pixels is the sweet spot there. Great, and then we're going to need to add a bit of padding to move that UK down. So we'll have padding top of, let's try 5 pixels again. Right, so what's happening there is that the padding in the general LI is overruling the padding that we want to add in here. Now again, there's a little CSS hack here that should be used very sparingly, but we'll pop it in here. It's the important tag. So if you put an exclamation mark in the word important after any CSS command, then that will override any conflicting commands for the same element. So let's see what effect that has. Okay, so now we've got our padding working nicely, but we don't want it to be that much. We want about 5 pixels. Okay, I think that looks good. And I think we're slightly too large there, so let's change the height to 18 pixels. 1 too few. There we go. Nice. Okay, I'm actually thinking the padding was slightly too much to move it up slightly, and then we're going to need the height to be back up to 20. Okay, great. So I think that's looking pretty nice. We've got the news, we've got UK, we've got the RSS feed, and we've got the menu at the bottom. Notice I'm not going to include this image in the background. That's because it's a copyright image, and I don't want to be distributing things with copyright images in them. So I'm not going to put that background in, but you can do that as an exercise for yourself if you want to put this background image in the background of this div here. You'll want to look into opacity because you can see they've got a nice effect here that the background image is still visible behind this div here. So my my hint for you there is to look into opacity. Please do drop me a line if you manage to do that, and I'll take a look. It'd be great if some people could figure that out. Okay, so we'll stop there again, and I will start again in the next video when we'll be looking at the actual news content of this page. Great, so we're making good progress here. We've got the header of the BBC News webpage pretty much intact. We've got the menu options, we've got the logo up here, RSS search. It's all looking pretty nice. So now we're going to fill in a little bit more content. We're going to look to complete this bit here. So the actual the news headline and the watch listen bar over here. I'm not going to do the whole of the content of the page, otherwise this video would be many hours long. But if you want to do it as an exercise, that would be great. And please do let me know if you do. I'll be really keen to see what you've done. But we'll just go as far as these two bits here. Okay, so let's start with adding a new div for this whole content here. So we're going to need another fixed width div in the middle, and then we'll start adding the date and last updated text there. Okay, so let's go back over to our text. Nice. So we want to get the news bar and fixed width divs copied down. Okay, and this one will change the ID to content. So if we copy down the news bar styles for now and change them to content. Okay, so we've got a copy of this news background there. Now this time we don't want to specify the height because we just want it to be a variable height depending on how tall the content is. We also don't want a background color because the background color is just white, and we also don't want to set the text color to white. Now it looks to me like most of the text is not actually black, so let's select that text color from the bold text there. Okay. Generally, stylistically speaking, black is usually avoided as a color of text or a color anywhere on a web page. It's usually looks a bit better if you use a dark gray rather than a black. So let's just put in a bit of text there. Okay, fine, looking good. So now this is indented a little bit too much. I suspect that's because we haven't cleared the floats. So let's put in a break div there to clear that, and now we're on the left. That's nice. Okay, so let's get this in first. Now all this text is actually looking a little bit smaller than that test text there. So what I'll do is I'll go up here and we'll change the content font size to something like 0.8 EM, and we'll go from there. So let's copy in this text here. We'll put it, whoops, right in the div as a p tag. See how that looks. Okay, not too bad. A little bit large possibly. Yeah, I think we might make it just a touch smaller, maybe 0.75. Okay, great. And of course, we've got bold text there. We could just put strong tags in, but as we're focusing on CSS here, let's do it as a span, and we'll call it, we'll give it a class of date. So I've chosen class just in case we do have another date further down, but it's likely that there's only one, so you could just about use ID there as well. So we just want font weight to be bold. Great. Okay. Now this headline here, we definitely want to be a header. So let's make this an H1 because it's our big header for the page. And let's copy and paste that text in. /H1. Okay, not too bad. We obviously need to change the color. So let's get our color. Great. So we need an H1 selector. We'll change the color to that. So now we've got the color. I think it needs to be a bit larger. So let's try a font size of 1.3 EMs. Oops, no, too small. 3 EMs. A little too large. 2, well, a little too small. 2.5, that's about right. I think that looks good. Okay, now we'll grab this image. We're not going to do this rotating image system that they've got there. That requires a bit of JavaScript, so we'll look at that sort of thing in the next chapter. But for now, we'll just right-click and save that image. So we'll put it in the desktop, my websites, CSS, and we'll call it headline image. Okay, there it is. Notice it's a headline image.jpg. It's used the same extension that was used on the original site. So we'll have to remember that is not a PNG. So headline image.jpg. Okay, so let's put it in straight away as an image. src is images / headline image.jpg. Self-closing. Okay, that's nice. The spacing looks about right to me. Now we're going to want the this paragraph text to be to the right of that image. So we definitely want to float that image to the left. So let's give it a particular class. We can call it headline image. And we'll float that image to the left. Okay, it doesn't make any difference yet because we haven't got any content to use otherwise. So let's put a p tag in and put in this text. Okay, right, so it's in the right place, but it hasn't quite done what we want it to do. We want it to scroll down here, and we're also going to want a bit of padding between the two as well. So I think it's worth putting this p tag and actually this lot here as well into its own div so that it all lines up nicely. So let's do that. So we'll have a class div this time, because we might want to use this further down, of, let's say, news item. And then we'll just indent that P, space it all out nicely, close that div. So what are we going to do with news item? Well, we definitely want to give it a bit of padding. So let's just have a look. So just for a bit of fun, instead of using padding, let's use relative positioning instead. So we can set the position to be relative and then give it that margin on the left of 10 pixels. Oops, not positive. Position. Nice. Okay, and then we definitely want to set a width as well so that it wraps round. Let's try a width of 150 pixels. That's a little okay, when we set that, that actually moves the whole thing down underneath the image, which we don't want. So let's float it left as well. That has the effect of moving it down a little bit. So we've already got our relative position up there, so let's just shift it back up a little bit. Nice. In fact, the text here is very slightly above the image, so let's go a little bit further. Move it maybe 15 pixels up. There we go. I also think that it's a little bit small, so let's change the font size to be, let's try 1.3. EM's a little too large. Maybe just 1.1. That'll do, and we definitely want to increase the width a fair bit, so let's try 200 pixels. And that looks good, but I think we can go a bit further. Maybe even 300. A little too much. Great, I think that looks pretty good. Excellent. So now let's add these links in down here. Now all of them are going to have this image here. So let's select that and take a screenshot. We'll call it triangle, and we'll drag it into our images folder. Let's bring everything back. Sorry. There we go. And now these are all links, and they're a slightly different color to the rest. So let's make them links and deal with that. So to make it a link, we give it an href. We don't care where it goes, we're just interested in how this all looks. So let's paste in our text there, close the link, close the paragraph. Why are pollution levels so high? Okay, great. Now we want to definitely get those the right color. Looks to me like it might well be the same color as the H1. But we'll take it directly from there. So this is news item. All the links in this section will have that color. So let's pop that in. Great, so it's the right color. It is underlined, and we don't want that. So we need to get rid of the underline. So we do that by using text decoration none. However, these links quite nicely underline when you hover over them. So that gives us an opportunity to use our hover pseudo selector. You remember that one? So then we just add in the text decoration, underline. There we go. And that then nicely underlines. Now, we could just put this in as an image, and that would be fine, but I quite like the idea of having a particular class that will automatically put that image in for us. So let's do that. We can't do it, unfortunately, for just having all links having that image, because there's a couple that have a different image. So we'll deal with those separately. But for this one, let's give it a class of video. And then up here, we can create a video class, and we can use the background image that we used for the search div up here. So let's copy and paste that, because we're going to need most of it in some form or another. So we want the background image to be triangle.png. We want it left centered and not repeated. Okay, great, so that's in the right place, but we're going to have to move the text a little bit to the right. So let's put a bit of padding on the left to achieve that, maybe 15 pixels. Okay, that's worked, but it's not enough. 20 pixels. Great, that looks pretty nice. So that's nice. That's separated out the image from the content here. So we've got another couple of video links. We'll just copy the text over from those. I'll just bring that in so you can see it. Select that text. Sorry. That'll do. Great, looking nice. Possibly slightly too spaced out there. Now, there are a number of different things we could do to fix that, but I think one that's worth trying is, instead of putting those in different paragraphs, let's put a line break in between. That brings them a bit closer together. And we'll get rid of that paragraph there as well. Okay, now they're possibly a little bit too close together now. So that gives us an opportunity to look at a new CSS tool that we haven't used yet, which is line height. So let's give this a class of links. And then we can refer to links there and give it a line height of, let's try 1.2 EM. Ah, 2 EM, a little bit too much. Let's try 1.5. What do we think? Just a touch more, maybe. 1.6. You can play around with that to make it so that you like it, but I think that looks about right. Okay, we're doing well. So we've now just got another link to put underneath. This one is not a video link, so it's not going to have that class of video, but we want to keep it inside our paragraph. Give it an href, but it doesn't matter where it goes. Okay, I forgot the line break. There, okay, great. And then we're going to need one more. I'll copy this one over. So it's going to be a very similar one, but I'm going to call it a class of, oh no, sorry, it's not camera, it's a sound image. So it's going to be extremely similar, except we're going to have the sound icon instead of the video one. So let's do the same thing there. Copy this into images and we'll call it sound. And then we're going to want to copy the video styles into sound and change everything, well, keep everything the same apart from the background image. Let's move this back over here. Tidy everything up. Great. Okay, that's looking pretty good. Nice. So I'm happy with that. So we're on to the last bit now, and I'll stop here to keep this video from getting too long. And in the last video, we will create the right bar up here, the watch and listen. Okay, so we're making really good progress here. We've got our BBC News header and we've got our article on the left, which all looks pretty good. The only thing we're going to do now to finish this off is the watch listen box on the right there. So let's get started straight away. You notice it's got a grey background there. So let's use our clicker to get the HTML code of that background. And then we'll create a new div. This div will float right. So it goes to the right of everything else that we've done so far. So let's call it, it can be an ID because there's only one of these, watch listen. Close the div there. And then let's see. Oops. So we'll set the background color to that. We'll float it to the right and we'll give it width, and for the moment we'll give it a height as well, just so that we can see it. Okay, so there it is. That's fine. It definitely needs to be a fair bit wider. Let's go for 300 pixels. Great, maybe a little bit more. That's too much. Okay, great. I think that looks good. It looks to me like it's a little bit low down, so let's use our relative positioning to move it up. Give it a relative position, and top, I think it needs to go up quite a lot, but not quite that much. Okay, yeah, I think that's great. So watch listen. So there's our box. We'll get rid of the height for the moment because we'll probably just want it to take the height of whatever content is within it. So let's start. It's got that quite big watch listen text in it. That looks like a header to me, so let's call it an H2. And we'll select the color that we need once again from here. It might well be that it's the same color as the text, but we'll leave it as it is, just to make sure we get it right. So we'll set our H2 color to that. Now notice I'm using a general H2 here because I know this is the only H2 I'm going to use. It might well be that there are other H2s which have a different color. If that was the case, then we'd need to set a particular class for this H2. But as far as I can see, it was perfectly reasonable to set this as a general H2 color. So let's have a look, see how that fits in. Okay, it's not too bad to start with. I think it needs to be a little larger, and we need to change the padding a little bit there. So let's first of all, by just setting everything to 0 just to see what's happening. Yep, so it's that margin that's moving it down. So let's have 10 pixels. Doesn't matter what we have on the right. Bit of padding on the bottom would probably help, and then we'll maybe a little bit more on the left. So that kind of thing looks good. In fact, their padding on the left is the same, so let's keep it as 10 pixels. Great, does need to be a little bit larger. So let's go for a font weight of, font size of 1.3 EM, too small. Let's try 2 EMs. Okay. Tiny bit too big. 1.8. Great. Okay, that looks good. We've got these little boxes here. I'm just going to copy those as an image. It's a little bit lazy, but it'll get the job done. Great. Moving everything over so I can see it. We'll just call it boxes. And we'll copy that into our images folder. Move that back up. And we'll put that in just as an image. So images, boxes.png, and we'll give it a class of boxes because we're going to want to float it to the right and probably move it up and down a little bit. So boxes, we'll float it right. Let's just see how that looks. Whoops. Colons and semicolons, very different things. Okay, so not bad. I think actually what we want to do is put the image before that the H2. And then the H2 won't be affected because the image is floated. But the image won't take space up underneath the H2. So that's better, but we do obviously need a little bit of padding there. We'll go for margins this time. So we'll have a margin, a top margin of 10 pixels, a right margin of, let's try 10 as well, and we don't care about the bottom or the left. Okay, that's not bad. I think the right margin is fine, but we do want to move it down a little bit. So let's have a 20 pixels top margin. Okay, I think that looks good. Nice. Okay. Now, getting onto these bits here, we're going to need to do a fair bit of screenshotting here. So let's screenshot each individual image. So we've got that bit there. We'll do them all at once. Now with these images, it's quite important that we actually get them completely right. So I'm going to do a quick bit of editing in the image viewer here. If you've got an image editing program on your machine, that would be great. But it's very easy on a Mac if you just double click there. So the important thing is we want to get rid of this white space around the edge because we're going to want everything to be exactly the same size. So I just want that. So I can use Command K to crop that image to just be exactly what I want. And then I'm just going to save it there, close that window, and I'm going to do the same thing for this one. Let's zoom in and get rid of anything that's not a direct part of that image. Problem is, if we don't do this, it's going to be very difficult to make everything line up and be at the right height. Get rid of that bit of orange there. Of course, if you don't want to spend a lot of time doing this cropping, you can just use the images in the download for this bit of the course. But I'm just going through the whole process so you can see what I've done. Okay, great. Let's close down those windows. So we'll call that left arrow. We'll call that pick 1. We'll call that pick 2. And we'll call that right arrow. Okay, and then we'll select all of those and drag them in. Great. So let's work our way across from left to right. So on the left, we've just got this image here. You'll notice there's a nice sort of white border there that just gives a nice separator from everything. So let's pop it in right in the code. So SRC is images left arrow, and we'll give it a class of left arrow. Where we go. So left arrow, we definitely want to float this left, and we want a border on the right of 1px solid white. Okay, looks good. I can't see the border there, it's not very clear, but hopefully it'll become clearer when we put in the next image. So now we want this bottom bit here to be part of or just below this image here. So I'm going to create a div which contains both this image and the text on the orange background there. So I'll call it class WL for watch listen block. Close div there, and we will start with an image src images pick 1, I called it. I'm not sure if we'll need a class for that one yet, so we'll leave it as it is for the moment and see how it looks. And we'll just copy the text. It's a link, so we'll put it in a paragraph tag and a link tag. Right, so I've done quite a lot there. Something I'm definitely going to need to do is float that left. So this is WL block. We want to float left. Okay, not too bad. So we're going to need to sort out that link there, give it a certain width, but you can now see that that white border is coming in quite nicely, and we need a background. So there's a few things to sort out there. Let's get the background sorted first. Color is that. Now, the way to get the width is just going to be exactly the same as the width of the pictures. So on a Mac, you can use right-click and get info. On a Windows system, there's a very similar option. I forget what it's called, but you should be able to find out the width of an image here. So that image is 157 pixels wide. So let's give this a width of 157 pixels. And while we're here, we're going to need a border right as well. Okay, great. So that 157 pixels looks really good. It's exactly what we wanted there. Now we've got an issue with this link. We definitely want to change the color. Now this is underlined. We're actually, if you notice, all of the links on the BBC website are not underlined unless you hover. So I think it would make sense to go back to our instruction here and actually make this for all links. So the color was specific to news items, but the fact that they're not underlined when they're just normal links and then underlined when you hover over them, it's true of all links on this page. So if we do that, that will affect every link. So that will save us doing it individually for each different type of link. Nice. Now we definitely want to change the link color here. So WL block A, color white. Okay, great. And I've just refreshed the page there, which isn't ideal. We've now lost the precise images that we had, but that's okay. We can carry on. So I think we just need to add in a bit of padding to this. This text here. So let's first of all get rid of all the padding that's there. I suspect that it's the P tag that's giving the padding there. Yep. So let's add in a margin of 10 pixels all the way around. Okay, not too bad. Now you notice that we're going over the bottom a little bit there, so we're too tall. So let's change the margins to be 8 pixels at the top and then 10 pixels on each side. See how that looks? Okay, slightly too short. Let's make it 9 at the top and bottom. Slightly too long. We'll make it 8 at the bottom. There we go. Nice. Okay, great. It's actually looking slightly off. No, it's fine. Sometimes when you zoom, you get slightly strange effects because the pixels are a little bit out. But that's fine. Okay, so we've got our second one now. We've lost the headline, unfortunately, because I refreshed the page, but we'll carry on regardless. So if we just repeat that section, so create another WL block. Sadly, I don't have the content of that link anymore, but that's fine. Looking good. Okay, great. So now we've got both of those, and finally we just want to put in the image of the right arrow. So we'll have an image there, and we want it to be right arrow. We don't want a border on the right this time, so we're going to need to change the class. Okay, not bad. We've got a bit of an issue with that image coming out a little bit too far there. Okay, that could be a problem with my cropping by the looks of things. So let's see what I've done here. If we have a look at this image, get info. It's actually 158, so it could be that I cropped the other one a little bit too far. But the easiest way to fix that is to just crop this one a little bit more. So we'll just chop out a pixel there. That should do the trick. And we'll save that. Nice. Okay. Great. So we've got a little bit of space left over on the right there. So we're going to need to make this whole div a little bit shorter. I think we guessed it. Was it around 280 pixels? Where were we? 380 pixels. So let's... That's pretty good. A little bit smaller, I think. 6.8. I think that's pretty bang on. Yeah. Fantastic. Okay. I think that looks excellent. Now we just need to add these links underneath, and then our work is done. So this might look like an image, but I think this is actually text, that little live link there. Or at least we're going to recreate it as text because we can. So BBC News Channel, Radio 5 Live, one question on the budget. So let's do those as... Oh, they've got nice little lines underneath them, haven't they? So let's do them as paragraphs. We could do them as ULs as well. In fact, that might be a neater solution. Yeah, let's do ULs. And that might give us an option to use the list style image option. Yeah, which would be quite fun. So first of all, let's just add these three in. So Radio 5 Live, budget, okay, just separate those out so they look nice. Right, okay, so they're there, but they're not particularly convincing yet. We want to make them links so we get this underline effect. So let's do that. Set that to each of those. Okay, nice, and that looks like it's set them to more or less the right color as well. So let's make the list style. So the bullet for this list is actually going to be the live option there. Or that live image. So let's get the image first of all. I haven't done that very well. Let's zoom in. Great. Move everything out of the way. So I'll take the second screenshot, rename it live, and then bring it in. Okay, so if we search for list styles CSS, it'll take us to W3 Schools. With any luck, you may have had a look at this already if you were looking further at our list styles. But we've just used the list style is none option to take it away. There are various other ones you can use. So circle is the default, square is another option, and various other options. What we're going to use here is this one. So list style image, and then you can set a URL as being your actual list image, which is quite nice for what we want to do here. So one way to change the list style image is to do it using this command, list style image, and set the URL there. There's a problem with that different browsers, Firefox, Chrome and Safari, do display that slightly differently, and they'll shift it up and down a little bit. So another way to do it is a similar way to how we set these images over here, and that's use a background image. So we'll do it that way for cross-browser compatibility. So going back over here, We've got our links over there. Let's get our watch listen div up. So for the LI, we want to set the list style to none. And we want to set that background image again. To save us retyping, I'm going to use the same information that we used before. So we've got background image, background repeat, no repeat, and we want left center. That's great. So let's set it to live.png. Brilliant. Okay, so live is now there. That's great, but we do need a bit of padding. In fact, we're going to need more than just a little bit of padding. So let's make it 5 pixels at the top. Don't care about the right. 5 pixels at the bottom, and let's try 20 pixels on the left. Okay, this is coming together, but we definitely need a bit more padding all round, I think. So let's try 10, 10, 10, 40. Great. Okay, that's looking pretty good. Just a little bit more padding on the left. Let's make it 50 instead of 40. And I think we do need the font size to be a bit bigger. Let's try 1.8 EM. Great. It's a little too large. Excellent. Okay. I'm really liking this. It's looking great. The only thing I want to add now is these nice little lines that we've got underneath those top two there. It's a nice sort of separator. So if we can, let's get the color. Can be difficult to track down the slightly darker color. Let's get rid of our developer tools. That will probably help. Zoom in a bit further. Ah, there it is. String of Ds. Not easy to catch. Now, notice though that we only want a bottom border on those top two LIs, and we also want the border to come in a little bit there. So we can do both of those things. The way we'll deal with that this time is we'll have a class in that LI. Let's call it BB for border bottom. And then only the elements with a class of BB will be given that bottom border. So 1px solid. Okay, let's have a quick look at that. Great. Okay, I'm liking that, but we definitely need a bit of padding around the edge of the whole thing. So let's first of all set the margin for the UL to 0. Okay, that's good. I just want to move everything over to the left before we move it in. Okay, so I think it's a simple way of adding just 10 pixels all the way around. That should do the job. I think that looks pretty good. We maybe have slightly too much padding on the top now and not enough on the left. So let's make that 0 on the top, 0 on the right. No, we want a bit of padding on the right and on the bottom and on the left. So let's just see how that looks. Great. I think that's pretty good. Okay, so we haven't completely replicated everything, but we've made a pretty good stab at this. It's a pretty nice reconstruction of the BBC News webpage, or at least the top part of it. So that concludes the CSS section of this course. I'm going to set a second challenge at this point, which is to create your own website, essentially. So we've used the copying of the BBC website as a nice opportunity to learn a bit of CSS, to practice actually making something. What we haven't done a great deal of is actually been creative and made something ourselves. But now that you have the tools to do so, I suggest you get out there and make something for yourself. And I'd really like to see what you've managed to make. So as soon as you've put something together at this stage of the course for yourself, put it up there, get it on the web, mention it in the forums, and I'll take a look. And now we're going to go on and have a look at JavaScript and making your website interactive. So congratulations on making it this far, and I look forward to seeing you again in Chapter 3. Great, so we'll just finish off by looking at how we can use external CSS files to link to our CSS. I think the reasons for doing this are reasonably obvious. Just in this reasonably simple page here, we've got a good 4 or 5 pages worth of CSS, and we don't really want those messing up the HTML. We want to keep those separate. Also, there's a really big reason when a user browses several pages of a website, we don't want them to have to download the CSS every time, because most of the time the CSS is going to be the same from page to page. So they can use the cached version on their browser, that is the version that their browser has already downloaded, and they don't need to download it all again. When users have got slow connections in particular, that can make a real difference. So let's see how we do this. First of all, we select all of the styles, but without the actual style tag at the top there. And I'm going to copy that, and then I'm going to create a new text document over here. Let's bring that in, and I'm just going to paste that down there. So that's all of the style content, but without the style tags at the top and the bottom. So just the CSS. And then I'm going to save that as a new file in desktop my website's CSS, and the usual convention is to call it styles.css, but you can call it whatever you like. Okay, great, that's done. Now how do I refer to that in my document? So we use a new type of tag called a link tag. So just like that, we enter a link, and we have a rel option. It's a relative option of a style sheet and a type of text /CSS, same as before. And then we give the href. So just like with a link, we give the location of the style sheet, which is just styles.css. And then we can close that. Okay, and now if I refresh this, it looks exactly the same. Just to prove that the external style sheet is what's doing that. If I get rid of the href, we lose all our styles, and we just have the content. So it's doing everything we did before, but we're doing it in a nice, stylish, external way.